and it was the first time I'd allowed myself to think that for a long time in that championship. Jesus, I think we can win this. I think we might even win this. Then it was trying to tell people, like, he hasn't won the world championship, like, you know, we haven't done it. And then what happened, which has never happened before or since.
Hi, I'm Mark Priestley. I spent 10 years working at the McLaren Formula One team with the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Kimi Räikkönen, Fernando Alonso, Mika Häkkinen. But those are just the drivers. I also worked with amazing people behind the scenes. Adrian Newey, Ron Dennis. They all taught me valuable lessons that I now know are not just applicable to Formula One. My mission with this podcast is to help you to think more like a Formula One team might think about the challenges you might face in life, on a personal level, on a business level, being a parent, social challenges that you face. I hope you'll take away some valuable lessons that will help you on your own journey towards high performance. Welcome to Pitlane Life Lessons. In today's episode, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Rob Smedley. This is a man that you know as a Formula One race engineer. Over many years, he had that incredibly close relationship with Felipe Massa at Ferrari and then into Williams. But he talks about how that close relationship really affected him on a personal level when Felipe had his freak accident at the Hungarian Grand Prix and that he nearly decided to give up on Formula One. But even more than that, he gives some amazing advice to businesses and to families, to parents, all based on his solid foundations of working with drivers in Formula One. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome to Pitlane Life Lessons. Rob, thank you so much for coming on, mate. It's been a while since we've had some time to catch up and chat. I want to start, not at the beginning, so maybe a little bit unconventional, but a moment in time that we've both witnessed, but from completely different perspectives. And I want to know, I've always wanted to know this, the other side of this, the perspective here, right? And I'm talking about 2008 in Brazil, last race of the season. Yeah. It obviously ended up going very well for us at McLaren with Lewis. You were on the other side of that. Can you talk me through just that last lap, those last moments? We've all seen the footage where people in the team, the mechanics, the family were celebrating, and I remember thinking that must be heartbreaking for them. How was it from your side?
It was. I mean, you know what this is like. You're doing a job, right? So all the people that you see like going a bit like crazy, their job had finished, but my job hadn't, right? So I was like still sat on the pit wall trying to understand what was happening. And it'd been a mega weekend for us up to that point, right? We'd had pole position, fastest lap. I mean, honestly, I think that was in all my time in Formula One, that was one of the best executed races that we ever actually did under that much pressure, right? Yeah. And so, you know, it was kind of getting to the end of the race, obviously, and it was just, you know, the rain came out, we had the right tyres on, Lewis had the right tyres on, but probably put them on, I think, a bit late. A little bit late, yeah. and you see, you guys, if I may, probably were under a bit more pressure than us because it was yours to lose.
Say desperate.
Yeah. It was yours to lose. It was ours to win. Yeah. If you want to look at it that way round. And I think we were fairly relaxed about all the decisions. We got all the decisions right, which I don't think I've ever done a race before or since where you got every single decision right in the wet. Even when you try to, like, you know, retrospectively paint over what you've done in certain races. And what I can remember is, so that we did have GPS back then. We had the little dots. Yeah. It's obviously much more sophisticated now with all the mini sectors and all of the detail that you get. But I can remember watching and thinking, and knowing how unreliable it was. And I'm watching on the pit wall, and I'm thinking, right, I could see if you watch page one, I knew that Lewis wasn't in front in page one because you know his sector hadn't appeared before Timo Glock's. And then they followed him on the TV. And then at that point, obviously, Felipe crosses the line as they're coming down into turn 9, 10. And I was trying to intently watch, and I think the producer like kind of pulled away and then comes back to it. And as I'm trying to intently watch, everybody thinks we've won and starts to pull me off the pit wall. And I was going like, stop, I'm still working, like words to that effect. But but as you know, if you kind of look to your right in Brazil, you can see down down. You can see the pit entry. So as I'm leaning, like they basically dragged me right off the pit wall and going, "Oh, we've won," like in Italian, obviously, and I just managed to kind of turn to this side here and have a look and saw the silver car in front of the white and red car.
Yeah.
And at that point, you just accept it, right?
Immediately, did you accept? I mean, you got no choice, but immediately did you switch into? Well, okay, it wasn't our day today.
Yeah. Then it was trying to tell people, like, we haven't won, he hasn't won the world championship, like, we haven't done it. And then what happened, which has never happened before or since from a sporting point of view, I was very or due to a sporting outcome, let's say, I kind of just like took myself off, and I went behind the little like hospitality buildings there.
Yeah.
Well, not hospitality, like little where you eat buildings, yeah.
Yes.
There in Sao Paulo, and I kind of took myself off there, and I cried for about an hour.
Did you?
Literally, yeah, uncontrollably. Just on my own. There was nobody else there. Maybe not an hour, but like 30 minutes, half an hour.
Yeah.
And then kind of sorted myself out, and that was the end of it. Like, I've always been a person that like never kind of looks back. That was the end of it. It was kind of, right, it's done.
So you needed to get that emotion out. You needed to do it privately, and then it was gone.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you know what it's like when you're in a dogfight for a world championship, right? It's so intense, and you can't allow emotions to play a part in that for the 10 months of the season is ongoing, the 9-10 months or whatever it is. You just can't allow emotions to come into it, because if you do, then you start to, your judgment is clouded, you start to make bad decisions.
It's amazing, isn't it, after that intense period, and it's getting longer and longer as the season gets longer, but you're right, because it's only the moment the sort of checkered flag drops on that final day, or you've finished whatever your job is on that final day, the weight that's lifted off your shoulders in that moment, I always found, you suddenly switch into kind of holiday mode almost immediately, and you've gone from one extreme almost to the other extreme in a matter of moments.
Yeah.
It's an unbelievable feeling. I'm not sure it must happen in many other jobs. You know what I mean? Where you're that intense and then suddenly you're not.
Yeah, I think it's sports, isn't it? That's what sports does. Because like if you take like a football season, like I'm sure the footballers and all of the backroom staff and the management, they all feel exactly the same when that final whistle blows. And it's the same for us, I think, in Formula One. You do feel this, like, and I always had this, especially in the more intense seasons, is that you've got this build up of pressure. And stress, and most of the time it kind of just comes out that I would go on holiday for a couple of weeks at the end of the season, and sleep for the first 48 hours, like, which much to the chagrin of my long-suffering wife. But in that case, because it had been so intense, and I really did think when we were in the middle of that race. And it was the first time I'd allowed myself to think that for a long time in that championship. Jesus, I think we can win this. I think we might even win this. We might even snatch this off them. And of course, it wasn't to be. But you know what? Like, I think that's the beauty of sport. At the end of the day, people always ask me, "Oh, was that the one that got away?" Yes, it was, and I have a very clear reason why it was the one that got away. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, Lewis had one more point than Felipe, and therefore he deserved to be world champion, right? There's no doubt about it. As long as everything's done above board, which of course in that case it was, then he deserves to be world champion. Yeah. End of story. Yeah,
and it's never won or lost in the final race, is it?
Of course
it's a combination of moments across the season, and we both know that. From both of our perspectives, things went right and wrong all the way through. The year before, of course, it was on the other foot. We went in as absolute favourites, and it was Ferrari that came out on top on the final day. One of the things that I thought would have been interesting to ask you is, because of that was maybe the one that got away, even more so because you're working on Felipe's car, and particularly during the Schumacher era. I know you only joined with Felipe at the end of that, but I guess there must have been an understanding there, as there must have been from Felipe, that you couldn't really win at that point. You were never going to beat Schumacher. It wasn't almost not allowed.
Yeah.
So Schumacher's gone, and now is this your chance? Is that why, did it hurt even more because that might have been your one and only shot?
No, again, like you just have to be fairly philosophical about it. Like this, you're kind of. I think everything happens for a reason, and I think that Felipe wouldn't have been where he was in 2008 had he not had that time with Michael and been very much the apprentice. And it was a very. I wouldn't call it a weird relationship, but certainly at the start of the season, you could see that like there was this, like, of course, respect from Felipe to Michael, but it went much beyond that. It was like almost like trepidation to like, am I allowed to talk to him?
Really?
It was kind of like junior mechanic to like to like whatever, like most junior team member to like most senior team member. Like, am I allowed to talk to the team principal? And Felipe was like that, and then slowly they built a relationship, and I think Michael really appreciated the fact that Felipe was, because he was quick, right?
Yeah.
He was super quick. He wasn't the finished article. He had a lot more to do to get to be that world championship material, but he was very, very quick. And I think Michael appreciated the fact that he was quick, but he was super respectful, and he was there to help him as well. Yeah. Which perhaps had been lost a little bit in the final seasons between Rubens and Rubens Barrichello and Michael. So I think that Michael appreciated it, which helped Felipe then to grow in stature. By the end of the year, you're right, because I remember the first win, which was Turkey, and everybody was like kind of sat with their head in that. Like I'd finished it, like I was like, yeah, we just won a race, and like Ross Brawn's like, oh my God, what have you done?
Yeah.
Like, those points were Michael's.
That wasn't in the script.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, I didn't realise it was like that. Or I didn't realise it was quite that intense. And then I think he won Turkey. I can't remember whether he won any more in 2006, but then he won Brazil as well, and he won Brazil at the Canter.
Yeah.
Which he was amazing that day. Felipe was amazing that day, and the car was amazing as well. But then 2007, I think the dynamic, as you say, Matt, that changed massively because Kimi came in, and Kimi was much more of a peer.
Yeah.
He wasn't like this. Felipe was no longer the apprentice. So then he had to get used to kind of, I'm on par with this guy. I'm allowed to kind of race him. And they had a reasonably good ding-dong during 2007. Kimi come out on top, and then it switched in 2008. But no, I think, the situation, whatever the opportunities are in life, you got to kind of take them, right? That was an opportunity. We took it as well as we could have done. As I say, I think there was certain reasons why we didn't win that World Championship, very clear reasons. And then other years we weren't able to. So you kind of have to just maximise what you've got. It's the same in anything in life, right? Maximise what's in front of you.
Well, yeah. And when you talk about the years when you weren't able to or you weren't allowed to, for example, was it a consideration for you when you got offered the job of being Felipe's race engineer? Because you're already on the test team at Ferrari, right? So you got the opportunity to step up and race engineer Felipe. There must have been a part of you thinking, well, great opportunity, working with a driver on the race team, travelling around and doing a thing, but I can't win it. You as a racer, you want to be able to win as much as the driver does, surely. Was that in your mind?
Not really. I can't. I think to say that I was asked to go on the race team is probably a little bit of a misnomer. I don't think anyone ever asked me to. They just told me I was doing it. And in fact, the story is this: that I started at Stewart, then I went to Jordan, and I'd quickly kind of gone like through the ranks and became a race engineer. And I always felt that I hadn't had enough time. I used to watch the test team and think, the testing looks great, because that's where you learn your craft. That's where you learn how to do it.
I used to love the test team.
Yeah. And you're away from all of like I don't want to call it the pressure, but the razzmatazz, right? And the regimented, like, you go out for an hour at this time on a Friday, and then you go out for this time for an hour on Saturday morning. It's kind of like, it was much more...
Well, it's all about learning to make the car go faster, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you have time to do that. In fact, that's your sole purpose for being there.
Yeah, of course it is. And you learn so much about every single aspect of the car. So I always felt like, this rapid ascent, which I've got no idea why I had this rapid ascent through the first, through Stewart and Jordan, were too quick for me, and I wanted to get back to the test team. So in fact, in 2002, I was offered a job at Ferrari, on the race team, and I turned it down. And I remember, like, I went to see, this was the first time I'd ever met him, I went to see Ross Brawn, who was obviously, like, it's Ross Brawn, like, one of the godfathers of Formula One. So I went to his house, and he invited me to his house, and he said, we'd like to offer you a job, and we'd like to put you on the race team. And I didn't take the job, because I went back to him and I said, I'd really like to go on the race team, on the test team. At that point, I'm like 26, and I can remember him giving me a look which I only understood, like, when I got a little bit older, was like, are you a complete dickhead? Like, we're like the world champions, we're multiple world champions. I'm offering you a job on one of the world championship cars. Why aren't you doing it? Anyway, he obviously got over that and offered me a job again the next year. So I went on the test team, and I loved it. I think I would probably, if testing, if we were still able to burn money like we used to back in the day, and the test team still had 150 people, I would still be doing it. But the opportunity came up to go on the race team, and I was kind of told I was going to do it. It was the Wednesday before Nürburgring. And they said, and Ross said to me, why don't you have a think about it? And then I said, oh, yeah, okay. And in my mind, I've thought, well, I'm going to do that polite thing where I kind of walk away and say, I've had a think about it, but I don't want to do it. And in his mind, he thought, I'll give him a ring in half an hour and tell him he's doing it, which he did. He gave me a ring in about half an hour, and he said, so have you thought about it? And I went, yeah, well. And he went, okay, well, you need to go and get your passport, because there's a plane leaving Bologna tonight.
I guess you don't turn Ross down twice, do you?
No. Well, at that point, he was paying my wages, so I had no choice.
Brilliant. You just touched on something there. You said you don't really understand this sort of meteoric rise you had through the early part of your career.
No.
But, I mean, there must be something. So what is it? What was it about you? I'm sure, as in everybody's case, there's elements of luck, people you meet, people you know.
Amount.
But there must have been something that people saw that helped you, that helped them see that there was a reason to put you on this meteoric path.
Honestly, Mark, it would be...
No one likes answering this question, by the way, because it's talking about how good you are.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
There is something, isn't there? There must be.
I think that, I don't know, I've always worked hard. I've always been like obsessive about details, and about trying to understand things at first principles. So when I first come into Formula One, and the race engineer at that point, there were different breed of race engineers back in that day, right? In the mid 90s, late 90s or whatever. And so when I would say to them, well, why do you fit a stiffer anti-roll bar, on the front if the car oversteers or whatever? I would ask a banal question like that, and they would always say, well, because you do, because it works. And I'm going, yeah, but why? Why? And I always have to go 10 deep on the why.
Yeah.
So I was always a mind like that. I've always been like super curious, and always been, I guess, outwardly able to communicate as well.
Yeah.
To get my point across. So I don't really know. I think that there are and always will be many more talented people than me in Formula One. I was very lucky that all the opportunities lined up as they did. I took the opportunities when they came. I worked really hard. I do work incredibly hard, like even to this day. I work harder now. I think, I always kind of look back and think, at this point now, I think I'm working really, really hard and harder than I've ever worked. Yeah. But I've always thought that. I'm sure in 5 years' time, I'll look back and think, wow, now I'm working even harder.
Well, I always look back to the test team days, in fact, thinking that must be the hardest anyone ever works, because there were no restrictions back then. There were no sort of curfews, and you could work as long as you wanted for as many days as you wanted. You sometimes didn't get back to the hotel. So I definitely get that. And the curiosity side of things, I think, is really important. I mean, that is, that is something that not everybody has. And when you're that curious, from a company perspective, and this is any company, if you've got someone that's that curious, you're constantly going to be pushing an answer. You're going to be pushing a little bit deeper, going back to, more and more back towards these sort of first principles. And that's where you start to uncover the innovations, isn't it? The new ideas, the new opportunities. Absolutely. So there's a huge value in that. And we'll come on to what you're doing today a little bit later on, but that must translate now into massive value to working outside of Formula One.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does, because I think you're never satisfied with the first answer that you get, or the first thing that comes along. And I'm always like even now, like in my current business, I drive everybody mad because they'll come and like, they're really pleased because they present me with like some data report, and I go, great, now we've understood that bit, but now we need to collect these bits of data to understand the next bit. And they're like, oh, for fuck's sake, like, why don't you just stop with like your curiosity? But I do, like, I think I've always, as I said, I've always been like that. I don't know whether people saw that. I think I've always been like massively enthusiastic. You talk about the test team. I mean, God, can you imagine trying to do that now at our age? But like what time did we used to get in? 6 in the morning?
Yeah.
6:30, something like that. You would standard leave at 1:30.
Yeah, that was a
2.
decent day, wasn't it?
That was a good day, wasn't
Yeah.
it? And sometimes it would be like getting to like 3:30, and you're looking at it going...
That's AM, by the way.
That's AM, yeah. Looking at 3:30, 4:30, thinking, oh my God, this is going to be one of the ones where you go back, take a shower, and then put the same clothes back on, because you can't be going in the wardrobe, come back to the track.
And you do that 3 or 4 days on the trot, week after week, and
week
that was
after
life.
Week. And you know what? I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
I was so enthusiastic about it. And now when I employ young, bright people, and even when I was employing like, really like good engineers from good universities in Formula One, they have to have that, because if you don't have that drive, if you've watched, there's so many, you'll know this as well as I do, there's so many guys that come into, young men, young women come into Formula One, and their only exposure to Formula One is what they see on television on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
And the first thing you got to say to them, and the first thing I used to say to them in interviews was, especially with young people, is if you think that's representative of Formula One, don't bother, right? Even though you feel so passionate about it, and you feel like, this is all you've ever wanted to do in your life, if you think that's what it's like, don't bother, right? Because it's very, very different. It's hard work, it's graft, it's like you're in this like weird ecosystem of hierarchy, and like, this organization of high functioning individuals, and you will play a tiny, tiny part in that. So if you're ready to accept that, great. If you're not, and you think that it's going to be Monte Carlo, yachts, supermodels, fast cars, forget it. And you know what? The amount of young people that come into Formula One, and they kind of do it for about 6 months, and then they go, is this as good as it gets? And you go, it's brilliant, isn't it? This is what it is. And they leave. I mean, you'll know that. It's amazing. I was never like that. I was almost like the happy idiot. Like,
well, it was almost, to me, it was almost like a badge of honour back then, that you'd been doing all this stuff that was, no one could quite believe when you tell them back home. These were the hours we did. These were the sort of days we worked on the trot without a break, and it does go against this modern day thinking, doesn't it? Of looking after people and sort of, political correctness, and the way that we treat the workforce today is becoming more and more gentle. You've got to tiptoe around subjects like this. Do you think there's a danger that we lose that passion and that grit that you and I are just talking about from back in the day, that was so valuable to a team? Are we in danger of losing that in the workforce in general now?
Totally, because I think if we go too far with all of what you've just said there, what happens is people lose ownership of things, right? When if somebody had kind of walked in and said to you, don't worry, Mark, right, go and have a couple of weeks off, and I'll run the car, right? Don't worry about it, I'll do that for you, right? You'd have went, no way,
no,
right? That's I own that bit, and it's up to me to deliver it, and it's up to me to deliver, that bit for my teammates and for this effort.
Yeah, it's really true.
And you would have felt like a little bit put out. I would have felt exactly the same, right? And I think what happens now, I mean, I'll tell you a story, and it's not a very pleasant story, but it's a true story, which shows like the amount of ownership that you feel. I can remember being at Mugello, our favourite place to go testing.
Yeah.
And we were testing, and we do long runs, and it wasn't even, I say wasn't even, that's probably not the wrong term. But it wasn't one of the official drivers. It was one of the test drivers, and we were doing long runs with the tyres, and I was running the car, and I was already on the race team, but I'd kind of started this day, and I remember saying to I ate lunch, which was always a big affair at Ferrari, by the way. We always used to love the fact that you guys used to get sandwiches with your name on at the test team.
We used to love the fact that you guys had a bottle of wine on your table.
Yeah. That's why we were always slow in the afternoon. And I ate lunch and then went back and I thought, I don't feel very well. Now, can you remember the toilets in Mugello, the old things that you stand on?
Yeah.
So I thought, so the car was out on track, kind of sent the car out. And I had my radio on, and I thought, I'm going to throw up. So I ran to these toilets, and it's not even a bloody story. And, like, it was kind of coming out of both ends. But then, like, so the chief engineer then, like, kind of is like, where is he? So he's banging on the door and go, what are you doing in there? And I'm like...
I thought you were going to say you had your radio keyed open for the whole time.
No, I didn't have the radio. But I come out, and I said to him, an old guy called Gigi Mazzolo, used to be Prost race engineer. And I said to him, oh, Gigi, I don't feel very well. I felt awful, like awful. And he was like, well, he said, can you like do this while the car's out on the circuit? Are you able to do that? Are you able to time it? And I was like, I'll try. So like, that's the type of ownership and like, that you feel, like the passion that you feel for it. So I think, it's a long way of getting to the answer to say, if we go too far with like, not pushing people and giving them positive pressure and giving them ownership, they never feel that, and it's always so easy to walk away and say, well, this isn't mine, I don't own this is kind of like a collective and a democracy, and like life can't be like that. No. You've got to own something if you want to be super successful.
I completely agree. I mean, there's obviously going to be always a balance between looking after people's health and mental health in amongst that pressurised environment. There's got to be a balance there somewhere, but it's a dilemma actually they're having in Formula One right now with 24 races as it is right now. Teams are starting to rotate crews, and I know that I wouldn't have wanted to be moved off. As you just said, I wouldn't want to miss a race because that's my car and it's my team and I want to be there to run it. And it's not just a fear of missing out, it's the ownership part. It's every race is another step in your development to getting better. You don't want to miss a step. So I think it's a real dilemma, not just in Formula One, but in the wider world as well. Finding that right balance is absolutely key. I want to come back to Felipe and just quickly back to that 2008 moment, because one of the things that I think has changed my perception of how I should be as a man is the way that Felipe reacted that afternoon, that evening.
Yeah.
He came out on the podium. I mean, I was in tears watching him beat his chest, up on that podium in front of those fans. What did you make of his reaction to that?
I thought that he took a huge step towards becoming a grown-up on that day.
Yeah.
He really did. It takes us, especially males, such a long time to grow up, right?
Yeah. I'm still waiting for it.
Yeah. Some of us are still not fully formed. All of us, I think. So, I mean, how old was Felipe back then? Was he late 20s, something like that?
Yeah.
And he took a huge step because he kind of understood the weight. It could have been all about him, but it wasn't. He understood that it wasn't just about him. It was about his wider team. It was about all of Italy. It was about all of Brazil on that day. And it was up to him to kind of carry that emotion and show everybody that it was all right. That sometimes in life you don't quite get to that final step, but if you've gone 9 steps up the 10 steps, you've done a really good job, right? Rather than just standing at the bottom thinking that's a really long flight of stairs to walk up. And I think that he was so generous and magnanimous on that day. He did take a massive step to becoming, the rounded adult that he is today.
Yeah.
And it was just really, really nice to watch. It was really nice to watch him like through that journey, because it wasn't a very long journey, right? We're talking about 3 years from when I started to be his race engineer in 2008. Sorry, 2006 to end of the season 2008. It's a 3-year period where this guy's kind of grown up and become a leader of the team, and not only a leader of a team, but a leader of a community as well, right? With moments like that.
Well, I looked at that moment, as I said, it brought tears to my eyes, and the biggest thing that came out of it for me was the massive amount of respect. I mean, I respected him obviously anyway as a competitor and as a rival, but in that moment that was elevated to an unbelievable level, because I looked at him as a human and thought, my God, that's who I want to be. When I face a tough moment in life, I want to be able to react like that. And I think what it did for me was make me realise that obviously I was feeling that way, but so was everyone else in that paddock, probably around the world. And I suspect it really helped him for the remaining part of his career, in that other people began to treat him differently, saw him in a different light, and maybe it extended his career. Maybe it helped with that drive at Williams and the way that people treated him when he got there. Those moments when you deal with things in the right way, even if it's not the easiest way, can massively shape your future. They're really important, aren't they?
You're so right, and I think you only learn that through sometimes by doing it the wrong way. We're not all born perfect, and certainly there's tons of times in my life where I thought I could have handled that better, I could have done better, but when you learn how to do it better, right? When you learn to deal with things in the right way, as you put it, it's so important, and it does. People kind of just view you as a grown-up and as somebody who is a leader, and as somebody that is a safe pair of hands, is somebody that will make the right decisions, right? Is not all decisions have to be about you personally. If you are a leader, whether or not you're chief bolt on the car, whether or not you're a race engineer, whether or not you're the number one driver of a Formula One team, or the CEO of a corporation, you have to lead in the right way. It's so important, and I think that I don't want to go massively off topic.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I think that if you look in the wider world, we see so many examples of people who should be elder statesmen, people who should be running countries, who don't behave in the right way, who think that they've attained this position of privilege, and that allows them leeway to kind of bend the rules and kind of behave in ways that are not the rest of us are not allowed to. And I think as a global community, we should never accept that. We should never accept that. If you're the higher you go in life, the further up the greasy pole that you climb, you must behave more and more in a presidential and correct way.
Yeah, although behaving in a presidential way is taking on a whole new meaning at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, well, not that type of presidential way.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, mate. Yeah. Have you found a way through either your own experiences or even maybe that day watching Felipe? I know you touched on that moment where you went out the back and cried for a bit, let your emotion out. Have you found a way that helps you, that maybe can help others to deal with crushing defeats? Because I know it's different for everybody and every moment is different, but the quicker you can turn that around into maybe looking forward or looking to the next opportunity or the next positive, surely the better for people's health and mental health and totally. For that of those around them.
Totally, yeah. And I'm honestly not sure I can give you any advice, because I was kind of born with this inane ability to be an optimist.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely a born optimist. I'm kind of I have the mindset of everything. Even when you're looking up a mountain like that, I'm like, yeah, it'll be all right. Let's just start walking, because if we don't start walking, right? And I think a lot of us who've come, who've been successful, especially in pressure cooker environments like Formula One, you have to have that mindset, right? So I can remember, really bad defeats in Formula One, or really crushing moments, stuff which has been down to me personally, right? Which is even worse to take. You know what it's like when you make a personal mistake, right? And something happens on the car, or something happens with the race strategy in my case, and you kind of think, oh my God, this is the worst moment of my life. And I always had this ability to get on the plane from wherever we are fly to either the next place or fly home and get up on the Monday morning and go, yeah, it'll be all right.
Yeah.
Let's get on with it. Let's go in. Let's try and understand that. Let's get on with it. So I don't know, to be honest. I mean, one of the things that I have learned to do much better with age is to be probably like take time before I react to things.
Yeah.
You know, so whether that's a good reaction or a bad reaction, to kind of have an even keel in how I react and not bring too many emotions to it. Because I think that if you are in a position of leadership, people look at that, right, and they go, well, if this guy's behaving like like a lunatic, we all should, or we all can. So I think that if anything, what I've learned over time is don't let emotion like go away from something, calm down, start to look at things very, very objectively in a black and white way, and then come back to it.
Yeah.
But how you deal with optimism, or how you get yourself over.
I think Formula One's very good at enabling us to be able to do that because it's so fast-paced, so fast-moving. You've almost got no choice. You can't be dwelling for too long on what happened yesterday because the next race is literally around the corner. Yep. And you're on a pretty regimented schedule. So, you know, you get at the end of the race, you're straight into your debrief, and then you might be, you know, packing up or getting on the plane or whatever. There's always a next thing, which, as you said, maybe it's getting on the plane or maybe it's waking up the next morning. There might be a thing in your schedule that you can associate with taking the next step or looking forward rather than looking back. And I think I've always found, if people are able to think of something in their lives like that, and it might even be brushing your teeth on the end of a day, that could be the end point. If you decide that's your end point, that's your end point, you know. And if you can get into that mindset of post brushing teeth, you then start looking forward, for example. It might be getting up in the morning, whatever. But I think Formula One for me was always very good at, because we had such a strict schedule with so many elements to it, we could pick one of those things, and that was the end of that race, and now we're looking forward to the next one. Guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. If you can take a very quick moment to like, subscribe, follow, leave me a comment or a 5-star rating, I would really appreciate it. It makes a massive difference to the podcast. I want to talk about your relationship with Felipe a bit more, because it was a very close relationship over a long period of time. It seemed from the outside like one of the closest relationships. I mean, are you still genuinely good mates?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. I think that, you know, he feels like a little brother to me, an aging little brother now, but still a little brother all the same. You know, I think we're very much, you know, you know what it's like in Formula One. You make tons of acquaintances over the, you know, it's such a small, incestuous, if that's the right word, environment. You make tons of acquaintances and you know, friends in some cases, but there's very, you know, it is also a difficult environment at times, and therefore you do find out who your real friends are in times of you know, in the more difficult periods. And I think Felipe, you know, is somebody that we kind of, if you like, grew up together through Formula One. You know, I'm a few years older than him, but we kind of, you know, I was already married when I got Ferrari, and then he got married pretty much the year that I started to run him. Then we had kids a few years apart, and you kind of go through all of those things together. And he's a guy that I absolutely share. You know, we share a lot of values about what's important in life.
That's good.
And I think that's what has made us close. And I never went into, you know, I ran, you know, lots of drivers in Formula One, not lots, but enough. You know, you build a relationship with them because you've got to. If you can't build a relationship with them, you're kind of dead in the water. But I didn't really become like close friends with any of them, and I didn't set out to become close friends with Felipe either. No. It just happened like anything, like any of your friends, right? You don't like see someone and say, I will become friends with that person. It happens organically, and that's what happened with him. And then we've just stayed very close, you know, and it's just a very nice relationship.
Did you ever find that, because there's always a sort of conversation around, particularly in the workplace, and particularly with a sort of I don't know if it's the right terminology, but you weren't Felipe's boss, but you were certainly the leader from the engineering point of view, from his perspective, for example, right? So did you ever find the balance between being a friend and being a colleague ever cause complications? And what's your viewpoint now, having left Formula One, you're employing people in the business you run today? Do you sort of have a hesitation to get too close to employees or colleagues as a result of the way that you and Felipe grew together?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'm very driven by facts, details, numbers, data, all of that type of stuff. Typical engineer, and I think that I am told now by my colleagues that I don't celebrate success very well, and I'm not always very empathetic in the workplace. I think that's probably the gentlest way of putting it.
How do you take that feedback?
Well, actually, to be honest with you, Mark, I do work on it. I do try to. I put in place mechanisms where we can celebrate success, and I have good people around me that say to me, perhaps you need to celebrate success. Remember now that this is the time that we tell people well done, because you know what it's like in our industry. It's like next thing, right? You win a race, all right, you jump up and down for at least 30 seconds, then nobody cares. Everybody's on to the next thing, right?
That's true.
So that has probably conditioned me, because of my mindset anyway, and because of my personality. It's probably conditioned me not always to be the most empathetic person and the most, I'm just about results, data, what do we do next? How do we do it faster? How do we do it better? But so that's kind of where I'm at now. Do I want to, am I against? Was that how you framed it?
Do you find yourself being a little bit hesitant to get too close to somebody you work with? I'm thinking, the reason I'm asking the question was, you were so close to Felipe, and the thing that popped into my mind is his accident in 2009, the Hungarian Grand Prix, I think it was, wasn't it? A spring came off a car in front and hit him square on the forehead, through the visor, nearly killed him, right? That's not an exaggeration.
Yep.
He's one of your best mates, as well as being a colleague. How does that affect you in that moment? And that's the reason I'm asking. Do you now feel a little hesitation to get too close to people you work with because of things like that?
Well, I certainly, I vowed after that, I would never get close to another driver that I work with. And then tragically, I was very close to Jules Bianchi as well. Mainly because he was a junior driver and used to hang around Maranello when nobody knew who he was, and come and stay with me and hang around and come to the house and we'd go and have pizza together and all the rest of it. And I just liked him. He was a little lost kid, and he was under so Nicholas Todd, who used to be Felipe's manager, who was also Jules' manager as well. So, and Nicholas said to me, look, he's kind of he has to be in Maranello 3 days a week because that's what the team demand of him. Would you look after him? So I became very close to him, and then tragically we lost Jules in 2014. But going back to the Felipe accident, that definitely happened with me, because I think up until that point in time I'd never truly understood the dangers of our industry, and when that happened, I really questioned myself, and it was for exactly the reasons that you say, because the whole colleague thing's gone out the window at that point, and it's my pal sat in the car. At that point I've got no idea. I just know that he's very badly injured, and then by the time we get to the hospital he's in a coma, and this whole thing's spiraling south at that point. And I come away from that on the Saturday night, and him, so Felipe's brother Eduardo and myself kind of went and took ourselves away and had a bit of dinner. I think just we had some room service in his room or something like that, and we just sat there quietly. We didn't talk for 2 hours. We were just waiting for the phone to ring. with even worse news. And I really questioned whether or not I wanted to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And now, luckily, fortuitously, that was that was the last race before the summer break. So I had 2 weeks, and I can remember being sat on the beach over those 2 weeks. And definitely to begin with, I was thinking, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to do anything dramatic, but so I'm not going to kind of resign on the spot, but I'm going to kind of phase out over the rest of this year, and then I'm going to stop. And then it was only through talking with my wife and and really recognizing the dangers of it, and and thinking, this is the downside. There's so many upsides to Formula One, but the downside is that your pals can die at work, right? There's a very real danger that your friends can get killed at work, as there is in a lot of workplaces, but it's not as real and present as it is in Formula One. And it took me a long time. It took me like over the course of that 3 weeks to kind of reconcile. And I came back and I thought, no, I am going to do it. And at first I thought I'm going to do it because I knew that Felipe, there was by the end of that 3 weeks, there was a small chance that he would come back and he would drive a Formula One car again. And I thought, well, that would be, he's done a lot. He's been there for me in difficult times. That would be me bailing out on him. And then slowly, like, the passion came back, and I started to reconcile as well that this is a very dangerous sport, and very bad things can happen.
Yeah. Sometimes I think particularly in the modern day, comparatively, Formula One's become so safe. You do easily forget that, don't you? It's sometimes it's that horrible reminder that you sometimes get. There's a wake up call that we are doing something that can really affect people's lives here. Post that accident, then in the interim, before Felipe came back, you got given a couple of other drivers to run.
Oh yes.
I'm most interested in that, in how you end up, or what you learnt about switching things like the way you communicate. You have to start to get to learn and understand who these new guys are, what they need from you, how they work differently to the guy you used to, because people at home are sort of working in offices or wherever. They're constantly looking or having to adapt, I think, and the best people can adapt well to working with a number of different people. And it sometimes means sort of almost code switching a little bit, depending who you're talking to. If you've got to communicate something very clearly, but to a different set of people, did you learn something about how you communicate with different people, with different groups within the team when you're faced with new personnel?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a good period that you've just cited there, because so Luca Badaru's test team driver came in, and I knew Luca pretty well, because we'd worked very closely together on the test team, and Ferrari decided to give him his chance on the race team, but it was a different level of communication. With Felipe, it was very easy. It was always very professional when we were in the track and at work, but it was very easy, right? There were times when we would have a conversation and there would be lots of people around, and we would have like a minor disagreement, and then you could kind of like walk away from that and like get hold of him by the ear when no one was looking and say, just listen to what I'm, this is what we're doing, stop arguing about it. If you haven't got that relationship with people, like with the drivers that came in, you do have to adapt. And my very, very clear view on this is that as a race engineer, you have to adapt to the driver, right? There's no, like, you see like these relationships where, and I'm not sure it happens much anymore, but it used to back when I was younger. The race engineer was kind of the dominant force. They were almost like the superstar, and they kind of handed it down to the driver, and the driver had to adapt to what the race engineer. I think that's a nonsense. I think if you take the guy who is under, you've got to, in any walk of life, look at the roles and look at who is under the peaks of pressure, right? Because that's when that person needs to be able to communicate as freely and as naturally as they want. So you have to adapt to, and I think that's the driver is under the peaks of pressure more than the race engineer, even though the race engineer is under peaks of pressure. So the race engineer has to adapt to the driver. So I found it, it was very important for me with Luca, and then subsequently with Giancarlo Fisichella, who came in for the latter part of the season, to learn about them and to kind of learn about them outside of the track and learn about how they communicate and learn about what kind of makes them tick.
Did you actively, going for dinners and
yes,
and so is that kind of thing, getting away from work to find out who it is you're actually dealing with here?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and I think that's really important. And I do that with I've always done that with like colleagues that I would have to interact with closely. I think that's a really, try to learn about them, try to learn what makes them tick, try to learn what they're anxious about, what they're worried about, what they're scared about. Try to learn about what motivates them and what they don't like and all the rest of it, because we're all different, right?
It's also something that's become, I think, much harder to do, particularly post-pandemic when we're working remotely, for example. The water cooler chats don't happen in the same way they used to. As you do, I know, we both work in a sphere where we're often going into companies to help them with this kind of thing. One of the things that I always try and encourage a company to do is to actively encourage that you're just talking about. Encourage those conversations. Yep. Give us space or a bit of time where there's nothing work-related specifically to achieve, but you're just getting to know who the people are sitting across the other side of the desk from you. I think it's massively important.
Yeah, it is. It's hugely important, because I think without that, how do you know the person? How can you communicate with them? How can you adapt to their personality? How can you get the best out of them? And as a race engineer, that's really what you're paid to do. You're paid to get the best out of the driver. You're paid to optimize the whole package, which includes the driver. So if you communicate in a way that they can't understand, or at times annoys them, it's never going to work, right? So I do think that's maybe something that I've always had as well, which is like that adaptability, to be able to adapt to different personalities. And also I think it's very important. I think all the drivers that I've ever worked with throughout my career is bring a bit of fun to it as well. It's the same with in business now, especially colleagues that the directors of my business that I communicate with directly, if you like, my direct reports, is bring a little bit of fun to it. It doesn't always have to be so serious, right? We can get to our objective, which is really, really, let's set ourselves really, really hard targets, but let's enjoy the journey as well. Otherwise, what are we doing?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it actually reminds me of just on a personal level. I keep thinking, I've always thought this when I'm dealing with drivers, and even from my side on the sort of mechanical side, you're always dealing with the driver. I worked with Kimi for a long time, worked with Lewis and Fernando at times. They're all very different, and it always reminds me of the journey that I'm on as a dad, right? Parenting, and I know you've got 2 boys as well. Do you find that having worked with drivers, because they're often behave like kids, don't they? And you have to adapt the way you communicate with your kids in exactly the way you're talking about there, because it's almost trying to put yourself in their perspective. I'm having all sorts of dramas at home at the moment with my teenage boy, who is pushing back against authority and wants me to remove many of the rules and restrictions that he thinks are just oppressive and over the top. And I'm trying to have this conversation where, well, okay, that's fine. I'm happy to try and remove the rules, but this is where we need to get to. So how do we get there without me saying, right, this is what has to happen at this time and this is how? And it's trying to give them a little bit of freedom to express themselves, be creative or whatever it is, and adapt to their personality, probably in a similar way. Do you find that it's helped you as a dad of 2 boys at home?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think all of life experiences help you to be a parent, right? Dealing with things in an unemotional way, or as much as you ever can with kids, right? Trying to deal with things rationally, trying to set boundaries, allow freedoms, all of that type of stuff. And you start off with little kids where there's got to be lots of boundaries, otherwise they turn into not particularly great human beings. And then, through the, like where you're going now, like with my oldest one, you have to like strip them back. But it's kind of like taking stabilizers off a bike, right? You don't put people out, you don't put your toddlers out on 10,000-pound road bikes and say, go and try that. You put them out on little trikes, and then, you go from there. and it's I think definitely being in a pressure cooker environment and seeing, having faced all of those things that we have faced in Formula One, and a lot of adversity and a lot of being, knocked down on the ground, getting back up, trying again, knocked down, getting back up and trying again. Teaching your kids that level of resilience, I think is really important. I think the main thing is for me is like trying to take the as much as possible, and this is very, very hard, but if it's taught me anything, Formula One, like with parenting, it's taking the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
And that's hard, right? Because I remember one of my colleagues in Formula One once saying to me, because my kids were like running around the paddock once. I used to bring my kids latterly to Formula One races.
I remember.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, that was part of my contract that I used
it?
to bring. Yeah, because I was ready to stop, and Ferrari didn't want me to stop. So I said, right, well, here's what you're gonna have to do, because I've got kids now and I can't leave my wife alone in Maranello without any family around her. So we started traveling a lot together, and then I did the same thing at Williams, in fact. So I think, my colleagues used to see me and they used to say, you're like totally unemotional at work, but like when it comes to your kids, you're like a nervous wreck, like when they're told. And I was like, yeah, it's very different, isn't it? And then like you kind of learn to like take that out of it. I mean, they still drive me mad, but we're getting to the point now with my boys that they're getting older now. So like we go to festivals together and we do all of that. We have a few beers and enjoy it.
How do you manage that? When you touched earlier on the driver-engineer relationship, where it used to be a bit of a dominance from the engineer, but then, as you said, you feel like you had to more adapt to the driver as the sort of dominant force or the guy that's under most pressure. Do you find with children, because they are under massive pressure in their own right, in all sorts of ways, through school and just generally growing up, do you find you have to try and do the same thing? Because traditionally, it's always been the parent as the dominant force in that relationship. One of the things I'm struggling with it, to be honest, but I'm trying hard, is to try and do what you said, is almost flip it a little bit, give them a little bit more space to be who they want to be, and I'll sit back for a bit and try and my best to understand and give them those freedoms. But it is really difficult because you know that they're going to make mistakes when you give them that freedom, and that's a really hard thing to allow happen, right? But obviously important.
Yeah, but it's super important, because if they don't make the mistakes, then they're not going to learn. So I mean, I take a lot of lead off my wife here, because I think as the dads we're always like, slightly heavier in the relationship that we have with our kids, right? And there's lots of psychology behind that. In fact, it's because of our usually we're the physically bigger of the two parents. The voice as well makes a big difference, right? To what kids associate from a very early age with authority and empathy. So I take a lot of lead from my wife here. My wife, I would describe my wife's parenting as relaxed. It's the best way of putting it. But I've learned a lot from that as well, because I think that we're very, if we take us in work mode, Formula One work mode, it's very regimented, and you do that, then you do that, then you do that, and these are the boundaries, and there's no leeway to do anything else, which is a good thing in that environment. I don't know whether it's such a good thing for parenting. So I do now. I think that I'm very lucky that both of my kids are they're good kids actually, and I would say that watching the oldest one now grow up to be a young man, he's just started sixth form college. You can see that kind of there's boundaries, obviously there has to be, but you can see by being more relaxed with him and stripping it away, he's actually found his way. And there's a load of mistakes in front of him that he has to make, right? And it's the same with the little one, Felix, as well, because he's only 13, so he's slightly behind in that development curve. But you're seeing that they are finding their boundaries. Then there's all sorts of like stuff that still is like, you know, makes us massively nervous as parents. Like you know, I just took my kids. I just took both of them actually we went to Reading Festival on Friday. I was literally the oldest person there by about 20 years. And then we went to Carfest, where I was about average age, on Sunday. And my oldest boy then was, because I've taken him the last few years, and my oldest boy said, "Oh, can I go on my own and camp with my mates next year?" And I was like, and my wife is like kind of really nervy about that, and literally because of one thing, because of the drugs.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you guide your kids? You know, because if you say to them, don't go and take drugs with your friends, right? What's the first thing that you would have done as Mark Priestley at 15 years old in a field with your pals?
Well, that's it.
Right?
Yeah.
Of course. So how do you do that? It's all about, it's just learning, right? We're only learning through life. We have to do things as parents, because we don't know, you know, I don't know how to deal with this age of kids now. So you've got to kind of do it. But I do take a lot of lead off my wife, but there does have to be boundaries, and you do have to have, like, you know, I think be open and honest with kids as well, because even from an early age we've been very open and honest with them to say, you know, we can do this and we can behave in that way, but if we start to like kind of cross boundaries and cross lines, then we have to rein it back.
Yeah.
And I think that's applicable to anything in life. It's applicable to business, right? As it is, as much as it is to parenting.
That's pretty much where I am. And look, you've just mentioned it there. It's applicable to business. That's where we're going to finish this up. Bringing on to what you're doing now, because you left Formula One, having worked for other people for most of your life. You're now founder and CEO of the Smedley Group. How on earth did you come up with the name?
Well, believe it or not, I said to my team when we started off, call it what you want, but don't use my name.
That worked out well.
Yeah, and that worked out really well. And they come back and went, well, no, that's what we need to do. So anyway, we ended up with Smedley Group. And it's so part of it has grown organically, like all the sports analytics side. Mm-hmm. You know, that's kind of people coming to us, you know, sports brands, and saying, it's really cool the stuff that you guys like do in Formula One. Can you do that type of stuff for my business or my sport or my team or whatever it is?
And that's through things like data.
Yeah.
So you're either taking their data and finding new ways to analyse it, or giving them new ways to collect data. All of that. It's
kind of the analytical side. It's the value added. It's creating insights, and it's as applicable to sports as it is to business. So it's like, okay, well, what data have you got? You know, and the amount of companies that I go into, and the CIO or the CEO goes, "Oh, we need a data strategy," and then you say, why? Because we do.
Everyone else has got one.
Everyone else has got a data strategy. I say, well, what are you trying to do? Data's useless. It's like any commodity. It's utterly useless unless you know how to deploy it. So what we try and do is we create insights. You know, taking all that learning that we've had in Formula One, and then building models and forecasting, and then, you know, ingesting data and comparing what we were forecasting to what's actually happening, exactly the same as you would to optimize a Formula One car.
Yeah.
And we do that for fan engagement. You know, we're doing that with clients in sports. And we're just starting to get into the wider business now as well, of like, you know, because I always say, you know, we build models now. This is how I always, like, the hook is always, we build models in Formula One that I can tell you what the qualifying result will be within most of the time, on average, 99.75% accuracy before a car's turned a wheel on a Friday morning. And you go and say that to somebody who's running like a company, like, which is like trying to forecast profits and losses or whatever. They go, "Oh, this is interesting. Can you help us?" So that kind of grew up organically. And then the other side of the business, which is the karting, Global Karting League.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, that's been that's a passion of mine. So that's a passion project, and it's been something that I wanted to do. I'm from a very humble background. And certainly not when I came into Formula One in the late 90s. There wasn't many kids who talked like me or were from my background, especially in as engineers. And that always kind of it always, like, you know, it kind of, I wouldn't say annoyed me, because that sounds a little bit pompous, but I was always very curious about it and why there's not more diversity. And then so when I stopped with the teams, I thought, right, I want to do something. I've been very, very lucky, right? I've been so fortunate, right? As I say, come from a humble background, and now have been afforded all of these, fantastic things in life. And I thought, well, Formula One can be, as you will recognise, so well, Mark, it can be an industry where you just take. People, they earn like 6 figures, then they want 7 figures, then they want, 8 figures, and it just never stops. It's kind of like, right, it can't all be about you, right? So I thought I wanted to do something that gave back, and I didn't really know what it was. And so I started to look at, well, how do you get more engineers involved, or how do you get more, how do you get more engineers from more diverse backgrounds involved, or this and that. And actually where I centered on, which was something that I would have never thought about if you'd have asked me this a couple of years before I started, was the driving bit. Because I looked at it and I was like, hang on a minute, I've worked closely with drivers all of my life. And apart from a few, they've all got a very similar background. And we're seeing more and more kids of privilege, let's call it, come through to be professional drivers. And that kind of struck a real chord with me, because my feeling was we're either really hyper fortunate as an industry that all of the talent, all of the global driving talent comes from this tiny gene pool, or there's something called Occam's razor, which means that there's tons of talent everywhere, and we're just not getting to it. So, and I started to think, well, why is that? And you start to have a look. Formula One's super expensive. Then all of the step ladder below that is super expensive. The karting is super expensive, and then I finally started to understand what people like Lewis Hamilton has been talking about. The Billionaires Boys Club and all of this type of stuff. And I thought, well, how crazy? So I started to work with governing bodies and have a look at why it was so expensive. 150k to go and do national level karting. Yeah. If you want to get recognised by the Formula One teams, you need to be doing European level of karting. That's 250k, and these are kind of like average numbers now. This is what it was like 5 years ago.
That's per season, obviously.
That's per season.
Soon racks
That's
up.
per season. So you're doing national level karting with your 8-9-year-old child, and you're spending 100 grand to do their hobby, right?
Yeah.
That's just not accessible to anybody but, very, very wealthy people. So I started to have a look at a different system, which is how we come up with Global Karting League. And then thought, right, okay, here's a little bit of money. So I invested a bit of money into it, to some of the guys that I already had working in the business. Said, this is what I reckon it looks like. I reckon if we do this, we can take 80% of the costs out. We actually ended up taking like 95% of the costs out.
Wow.
Still a very expensive sport. It's still, £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 per season. But you get to do a full season of outdoor racing for that type of number rather than 100k. Now, as I said, that's still a big number, and it still precludes a lot of families. But one step at a time, we've been able to include many more families. We're finding real talent. We're finding talent from more diverse backgrounds, and what that's given me is it's given me the confidence now that I've invested into it to expand into more global territories next year. Amazing. So 2025. We're going to open up in the, I won't tell you where just yet, but in 2 more markets. And then that will give us the global field. So you'll have the UK and these 2 other markets. That will give us a global field. We'll bring everybody together in a World Cup at the end of the season. It's all kind of included in the price. And the winner, assuming that everything works out, the winner will then go on to be in cars.
Fantastic. I mean, it's an amazing thing, and just by its very nature of being opening the whole sport up to so many more people, the chances, going back to the data and the statistics, the literal statistics are that you will get a far greater pool of bigger talent rising up, and as a result of that, you're far more likely to get somebody coming from what you're starting here and finally reaching the top than actually you are from this very small pool that we were taking from before. The legacy that's being created here should be huge and has the potential to be huge. So wonderful stuff. Just finally, one thing I want to ask you quickly, you touched on your other side where you're working with businesses through the data analytics. How have you found, and I'm only asking this from a personal perspective as a reference, how have you found the transition from the Formula One world and dealing with people within that, as we all did, to now stepping out into the real world, I'll tell you my perspective, I found it incredibly frustrating at first, and I've had to develop massive amounts of patience to deal with people who do not work on the same time frame that Formula One has ingrained in me.
Yeah, totally. I've found it very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Very, very difficult. And still find it very difficult. A mutual friend of ours, and I'm going to cite him because he says it all the time, DC David Coulthard, always says, you know, the rest of the world is totally underwhelming. It's a really bad accent, but anyway. But he he's absolutely right. Yeah. I think that you do have to kind of get into, you know, when I first started to deal with, let's call it the outside world, I don't think I did a very good job of it at all, because I'm very, very results driven and want to get stuff done and want to get on with it. And I'm still working on Formula One, like, timescales at this point. And you end up looking like you have like some kind of psychological disorder because you're like a rabid dog. Like come on, let's get on with it, make a decision.
Yeah.
And
I went through 3 sets of builders at my house because none of them were good enough.
Yeah.
Actually, it's just how builders were. No disrespect to the building industry, but I think it's the same anywhere. I had unrealistic expectations outside of Formula One.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think you do have to temper. But what I've found is that I think there's also like a real point of education that people like you and I can do here as well. Is that, you know, when you've got to like gently explain timescales and say, look, you think this, you know, you've set yourself a target of 3 years. That's 3 years where your business isn't actually like, you know, taking advantage of whatever it is we're going to do together. I think we can do this in a year. That doesn't stop us doing, you know, there's still a long tail of work that needs to go on. But I think there's stuff that you can be getting on with. And here's how we would have done it in Formula One. And by the way, it wouldn't have taken us a year. It would have taken us 2 months. And then they go, really? Right. Okay. Well, maybe we've been doing things wrong. Yeah. And I think that it is up to people who are privileged enough to come from like a Formula One background like we are to educate businesses in timescales. You know, maybe to do it slightly gentler than what I was doing it to start off with. But I think that's a point of education and learning for businesses as well.
I mean, it speaks to the very high level that Formula One operates at. And as you said, it's been a privilege to be part of that. Just before I let you go, I want you to try and leave us, if you can, with an overriding message, the one final sort of pit lane life lesson that you think your many years in this sport has taught you that now helps you as you go through the rest of your days. Anything you can share?
I mean, it's all part of the same thing, but it's 3 very, very linked things. It's tenacity, it's resilience, and it's hard work. Because I think those three things, regardless of where you started off in life, you know, how advantageous or disadvantageous that was, how even clever you are. I think if you have tenacity, if you are prepared to work hard and work as hard or harder than anybody else, and you have resilience, because you'll need it, then you will succeed. Yeah. Honestly, I think that you can. I believe that anybody can manifest anything that they want to. Right, I really do think that, but you've got to work hard and you've got to be resilient because you will keep getting knocked down.
I mean, that's it. There, it's not there's no magic wand required, is it? Those are all 3 things that anybody can achieve, and Correct. It's more of a mindset thing. So, I mean, that's the good news for anybody listening. You can have whatever you want. You can achieve whatever you want. It just takes those things. Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. I really appreciate you coming on. I think you shared some wonderful insights. I think what you're doing now particularly with the Global Karting League, is an amazing project to give back to a sport that's given you so much, as you said, but you are going to inevitably create a massive legacy here that I think will go on to support the sport for many years to come. So that is a really important thing you're doing. So well done. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that was a fascinating conversation. I hope you agree. I absolutely loved some of the things that Rob said, some advice that I've never heard him talk about before, advice that's going to help me, I know, as I move through my parenting journey, as well as moving into business as well. I hope you enjoyed it too. In the meantime, before I speak to you next, please remember this: do the right things, do the things right.